It was an autumn evening. The grey sky of London was slowly darkening, and a fine rain was tapping against the apartment windows. In apartment number 27, Emma was sitting at her table, examining an old photo album. The photos were laid out before her like memories, each carrying the weight of the past. However, one photo was different from the rest. It depicted the garden of Emma's childhood home with the shadow of a stranger lurking, a photo that had no reason to be in the album. "How is this possible?" she murmured. She held the photo up to the light, but fear kept her from examining it too closely. Just then, a faint noise came from the kitchen. Emma froze and listened intently. Silence, but it was a suffocating and settling kind of silence. Summoning her courage, she walked toward the kitchen. She turned on the light, but nothing was there. At that moment, she heard a whisper behind her. Emma, her name echoed as if from another world. Her breath quickened. When she turned around, there was nothing there. However, the photo was no longer on the table. Emma's phone buzzed with a message. The screen displayed an unknown number. "You know you're not alone tonight." For a moment, Emma didn't know what to do. Her heart was pounding as she tried to call the sender, but her phone wasn't working. The air in the apartment felt heavy, almost crushing. The fogged windows reflected the tension in the room. Gripping a kitchen knife, Emma began inspecting the corners of her living room. Just then, the door to the bedroom at the end of the hallway started to close slowly. "Who's there?" she shouted, but her voice betrayed her fear. She cautiously walked to the door. When she pushed it open, the room was pitch black. She tried to turn on the light, but the bulb shattered. In the darkness, she began to hear breathing. "Who's there?" she shouted, but her voice betrayed her fear. She cautiously walked to the door. When she pushed it open, the room was pitch black. She tried to turn on the light, but the bulb shattered. In the darkness, she began to hear breathing. It wasn't human, it was deeper, more primal. Emma hurried to the front door to escape, but it was locked. As she fumbled with the lock, she felt cold breath on the back of her neck. She screamed and turned around, but there was nothing. Yet, heavy footsteps echoed within the room. Finally, Emma decided to call for help through the window. When she opened it, she saw a dark figure staring at her from the window of the building across the street. As she locked eyes with it, her vision blurred, and everything went blank. When she woke up, she was in a hospital room. White walls and a sterile atmosphere surrounded her. A nurse stood by her side, smiling gently. "Are you feeling okay?" the nurse asked. When Emma tried to speak, the room's lights began to flicker. The nurse's face darkened, and black liquid started streaming from her eyes. In a mechanical voice, the nurse whispered, "You can't escape." As Emma let out a muffled scream and tried to get out of the bed, footsteps echoed from the hospital corridors, approaching the door to her room. At that moment, the door slowly creaked open. Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. When the door fully opened, a dark shadow entered the room. The shadow had no discernible face, but its presence made the air even heavier. Emma pulled back behind the bed. The shadow spoke in a metallic voice, "You can try to run, but you can't hide from the truth." Just then, the monitors next to Emma's bed began to glitch. Haunting images flashed on the screen. Her childhood home's garden, the figure in the shadows, and the sound of a child crying. As Emma stared in shock at the screens, the shadow moved closer. Suddenly, an image flooded Emma's mind. It was a scene from her past, a forgotten moment when, as a child, she had been playing alone in the garden, and a stranger had been watching her. That long-buried memory resurfaced with startling clarity. The shadow's voice echoed, "I've been following you since that day, watching you, Emma. And now, it's time for you to remember." Emma's thoughts were in turmoil. What had happened that day? Why was this stranger following her? But she wasn't given time to dwell on these questions because the footsteps in the corridor began again. This time, they were louder and faster. The person who entered the corridor wasn't a nurse, it was a security guard. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he called out. The person who entered the corridor wasn't a nurse, it was a security guard. The person who entered the corridor wasn't a nurse, it was a security guard. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he called out. For a moment, Emma felt a glimmer of hope, but the security guard froze as soon as he stepped into the room. His eyes weren't on Emma but fixed on a corner of the room. Emma turned in that direction and saw the shadow reappear. But this time, it wasn't alone. Inside the shadow, faint faces emerged, faces she almost recognized but couldn't fully identify. The security guard was suddenly dragged out of the room, and the door slammed shut with a loud bang. Emma thought she was alone again, but the shadow kept moving closer. "You can't hide. You ignored me once, but now we're together," it said in a chilling tone. At that moment, Emma's mind flashed to the photo. Then, something unexpected happened in the room. The small cabinet beside the hospital bed opened, and the photo album fell to the floor. Its pages began turning on their own. Each page revealed dark moments from Emma's life. But the last page of the album was blank.